guys, welcome back. If you are new here, hi, my name is Shayna, and in my little corner of the internet, we talk about spooky history of all kinds. And if that sounds like something you're interested in, be sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell because I'm here for you on Wednesdays. I also have a podcast called Spooky History with Shayna Blake, and that is where the audio of this video will be. So if you're interested in that, I will have a link down in my description. I have a little announcement, and that is that January 20th will mark my first year of uploading on YouTube. And I would like to do something a little special, like making a fun video where I answer your questions if you have any. So if there's something you'd like to know about me or my channel, be sure to comment below or head over to my Instagram and send me a message. I just figured it'd be kind of fun. If I don't get enough, then I'll make another video, a regular video. I just wanted to see if you guys would want to do something like that. And today we are going to be talking about the Wendigo. Now, what comes to mind when I picture the Wendigo is that episode on Supernatural where Sam and Dean go into the forest to capture this creature that moves so fast they can barely see it. The shows with mystical monsters is fun to watch, right? Because it's not real, right? Well, to some of us, the Wendigo is very real. So let's talk about where the Wendigo originated from. Now, there are two stories that tell of how this monster came about. And the first story tells of a hunter who was lost. Then during a brutally cold winter, his intense hunger drove him to cannibalism. And after feeding on another human's flesh, he was transformed into a crazed man-beast, roaming the forest in search for more people to eat. Then in the second version of the story, the first Wendigo is said to have been a brave warrior who would make a deal with the devil in order to save his tribe. He gave up his soul and would be transformed into the Wendigo. But when peace came to the tribe, there was no need for such a fearsome creature, and the warrior would be banned from the tribe and forced to live as an outcast. Honestly, I'm not a fan of cannibalism. I'm not a fan of zombies. Anything where it has human eating human. You know what I mean? You cannot get me to watch. What is that one show? The Walking Dead. I will not watch it. You can't make me. My husband says there's more to it. It's not just always about zombies eating people, but I don't care. I can't watch it. I just can't. There's just something about it. Not my thing. But anyways, back to the story. Now, it's said that the Wendigo tales come from the Algonquian Native American folklore, but it really depends on who you ask. Now, some people who claim to come across this monster says it's really a relative of Bigfoot, but others will report that it's more compared to a werewolf instead. Now, Wendigo-like creatures are also found in legends of other Native American tribes, including the neighbors of the Algonquians, which are the Iroquois. I'm sorry if I'm butchering these names, but they have a Wendigo-like creature in their stories as well. Now, the Wendigo is said to be a cold weather creature, so most of the sightings have been reported in Canada as well as colder northern states in the US, like in Minnesota. At the turn of the 20th century, the Algonquian tribes blame many of the unsolved disappearances of people on the Wendigo. Now, these creatures are not pleasant to look at. They're pretty gnarly looking. According to legends of the Nahanni Valley, a native author and ethnographer named Basil H. Johnson once described the beast as, and I quote, "The Wendigo was gaunt to the point of emaciation, its desiccated skin pulled tightly over its bones, with its bones pushing out over its skin, its complexion the ashy gray of death, and its eyes pushed back deep into the sockets. The Wendigo looked like a gaunt skeleton recently disinterred from the grave. What lips it had were tatered and bloody, unclean and suffering from separations of the flesh. The Wendigo gave off a strange and eerie odor of decay and decomposition, of death and corruption." End quote. Sounds horrifying. Now, according to the ethnohistorian Nathan Carlson, it's also been said that the Wendigo has large, sharp claws and massive eyes like an owl. Now, when it comes to its speed, it's described in two different ways. It seems to be unusually fast and can endure walking for long periods of time, even in harsh winter conditions. Now, others will say it walks in a more haggard manner, as if it's falling apart. Honestly, any description of this beast sounds horrifying, in my opinion. Now, here's a quote of how the Ojibwa described the beast. It was a large creature, as tall as a tree, with a lipless mouth and jagged teeth. Its breath was a strange hiss, its footprints full of blood, and it ate any man, woman, or child who ventured into its territory. And those were the lucky ones. Sometimes the Wendigo chose to possess a person instead, and then the luckless individual became a Wendigo himself, hunting down those he had once loved and feasting upon their flesh. End quote. My word. Terrible. Now, unlike other monsters, the Wendigo doesn't rely on pursuing its prey. Rather, one of its creepiest traits is its ability to mimic human voices. He uses this skill to lure people in and draw them away from civilization. Then once that person is isolated deep in the wilderness, he will attack them and feast on them. Now, the Wendigo is translated into two different things. One is the spirit of lonely places, and the other is the evil spirit that devours mankind. Now, the second translation is related to yet another version of the Wendigo, and that is telling of its ability to curse humans by possessing them. Now, once it has infiltrated their minds, he can turn them into Wendigos as well, giving that person a lust for human flesh, which leads us to the modern medical term called Wendigo psychosis. Now, there are psychiatrists who consider it a syndrome that creates an intense craving for human flesh and a fear of becoming a cannibal. What is ironic about this is that this psychosis occurs within people who live around the Great Lakes of Canada and the US. The psychosis usually develops in the winter in individuals who are isolated by heavy snow for long periods. The first initial symptoms are poor appetite, nausea, and vomiting. Then the individual will develop a delusion of being transformed into a Wendigo monster. Now, people who have Wendigo psychosis will increasingly see others around them as being edible. Now, when people start to show signs of this psychosis, native healers will attempt to cure them. If these attempts fail and the person starts to act violently or becomes antisocial, that is when they unfortunately will be executed. I believe they even burned the bodies of people who were being transformed into Wendigos because they were worried that it could still spread unless it was burned, if that makes sense. Now, there are reported cases of this psychosis that I thought were pretty interesting and wanted to share with you. Now, the first case was in 1661. A Jesuit relations document stated, and I quote, "What caused us greater concern was the intelligence that met us upon entering the lake, namely, that the men deputed our conductor to summon the nations to the North Sea, and assigning them to rendezvous where they were to await our coming, had met their death the previous winter in a very strange manner. These poor men, according to the report given us, were seized with an ailment unknown to us, but not very unusual among the people we were seeking. They are afflicted with neither lunacy, hypochondria, nor frenzy, but have a combination of all these species of disease, which affects their imaginations and causes them a more than canine hunger. This makes them so ravenous for human flesh that they pounce upon women, children, and even upon men like veritable werewolves and devour them ferociously without being able to appease or glut their appetite, ever seeking fresh prey, and the more greedily the more they eat. This ailment attacks our deputies, and as death is the sole remedy among those people for checking such acts of murder, they were slain in order to stay the course of their madness." End quote. So that's crazy. Wow. So were these men driven mad due to the isolation? Then the stories of the locals made them believe they were turning into Wendigos? Perhaps they ingested some poison that made them go mad with a crazy hunger for human flesh? Or did this evil Wendigo spirit infiltrate their minds and made them ravenous? Honestly, it's very creepy to think about either way. Now, there are two more documented cases that I want to go over. Now, this next one occurred in 1878. There was a Plains Cree trapper from Alberta named Swift Runner. A Swift Runner was a trader with the Hudson's Bay Company who was married and had 6 children. Now, during the harsh winter of 1878 and 1879, Swift Runner and his family were starving, along with numerous other Cree families. Now, his eldest son would be the first to die of starvation. And then soon after this, Swift Runner would succumb to the Wendigo psychosis. There was an emergency food supply that was available at the Hudson's Bay Company post, but that was 25 miles away from where they were, and no one was going to travel 25 miles in the snow for food and then have to travel the 25 miles back. So instead, he made the terrible decision to kill the remaining members of his family and consumed them. He would eventually confess and would be executed by authorities at Fort Saskatchewan. That's a tragic story. Now, the other well-known case involving the psychosis involved a man named Jack Fiddler, who was an Oji-Cree chief and medicine man known for his powers of defeating these Wendigo beasts. Now, Fiddler would claim that he had defeated 14 Wendigos during his lifetime. He believed some of these creatures were sent by enemy shamans, and others were just members of his band who had been taken with the insatiable, incurable desire to eat human flesh. Now, there were family members of a sick woman who had asked Fiddler to kill her before she turned into a Wendigo. She was showing the early signs of the sickness. So Fiddler had sympathized with the family and agreed that this loved one was going to turn into a Wendigo and gave a mercy killing. Now, in 1907, Fiddler would be arrested by the Canadian authorities for murdering the loved one. I guess they just felt like there was no proof that she was turning into a Wendigo because she hadn't officially turned into a Wendigo. So Fiddler thought he was being preventative. Now, it was soon after this that the Wendigo psychosis cases would decrease as the Native Americans came into greater contact with Western ideologies. Now, however, sightings of the creature are still being reported, especially in northern Ontario near the cave of the Wendigo, and also around Kenora, where traders have allegedly spotted it. Now, there are many that still believe that this creature roams in the woods and the prairies of northern Minnesota and Canada. Many have given Kenora, Ontario, Canada, the title of Wendigo capital of the world. So those are the places I will make sure to not be traveling to. Now, the most recent report was in 2019 by a hiker. Now, he wasn't seen, but it said the hiker heard a mysterious howl in the Canadian wilderness. He stated, "I've heard many different animals in the wild, but nothing like this," end quote. So who knows? It could have been, or it could have been Bigfoot, whichever. Now, there is a more, I guess you could say, realistic or more accepted explanation of the Wendigo. And I heard this and I thought it was pretty interesting, so I wanted to include this. Now, the legend of the Wendigo has long been associated with real-life problems like insatiable greed, selfishness, and violence. It's also linked to many cultural taboos against these negative actions and behaviors. Essentially, the meaning of Wendigo can also function as a symbol of gluttony. Now, according to the book called Rewriting Apocalypse in Canadian Fiction, Wendigo stories were once viewed as an illustration of the violent nature of the very people telling the stories, and that these stories may represent the Indigenous people's response to the horrific violence that was unleashed on them by non-native people. Now, many anthropologists believe that the concept of a Wendigo only developed after the Native American had contact with the Europeans. And then the book also adds that some modern day confusion about the Wendigo may have to do with certain terms getting lost in translation. So I'm going to quote what what they said there. One well-known mistake was traced to the compiler of a dictionary, who encountered the information regarding the word Wendigo and substituted the word ghoul for the appropriate word fool because he thought the native people meant ghoul, end quote. So some of the anthropologists also argue that Wendigo stories, especially the ones that involved Wendigo accusations, are linked to stress within the Native American communities. Now, this local tension is what could have led to those accusations, which is comparable to the fear that preceded the Salem witch trials. However, the cases of the Native American communities, most of the stress was due to lack of resources. So just about the only thing scarier might be what one would do if the starvation became too much to handle. So I want to know what you all believe. Do you believe that the Wendigo is an actual monster who roams the forests in Minnesota and Canada? Or do you believe that the creature isn't real, but is a story that is associated with the Europeans coming? I'm honestly really leaning towards the second, only because it's easier for me to accept. It's honestly terrifying to think that a creature like this could be living in our forests. So that's my opinion. Now, after thinking and researching this, now when it came to the illnesses of people who supposedly turned into Wendigos, it sounds like these people could have came down with a normal illness, but with them having the fear of Wendigos being drilled into their brain, they start to convince themselves that they are turning into a Wendigo, which would in turn make them become a Wendigo, if that makes sense. That's really just my opinion though. I didn't read that anywhere, but honestly, who knows? Either way, this was a super interesting topic to look into, and I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button as well as the subscribe button and notification bell. And also leave me a comment of what you thought of the story and if you happen to have any theories. But if you're watching on my podcast, be sure to head over to my Instagram at ShaynaBlake03 to watch for updates and also send me a message letting me know your theories. And don't forget to send me your questions on what you all want to know so we can chat in my next video, hopefully. But that's it for me today, guys. I hope you all have a blessed day, and I will see you all next week. Bye!